to the Minutes to Win It podcast. I'm Jason Gilbo at JGilbo11. With me is Russell Clay at Russell J. Clay, breaking down tonight's NBA six-game slate. And I was talking before the show, I'm not a big fan of this one. I'll be modest, I guess. I'm not a big fan of this slate. I think it's a pretty chalky, pretty boring slate.
Most of the days you kind of hear us come in and we're like, yeah, this is going to be fun. Like, this is a good tournament slate. This is a good cash game slate. No, not today. You're getting the realness. This is, DFS is always fun, but of the slates, this one's kind of like, all right, let's do this.
Yeah, you're looking at the games, Golden State, Atlanta. That's a fun one if that one can stay close. We get the one blowout concern, Charlotte and Phoenix. But kind of the other games, it's almost looking like you're looking at Dallas, Orlando, the Lakers, Nets, Blazers, Knicks. It's all really chalky. Like, everyone's going to be on the same plays.
Yeah.
And
Especially in that Nets Lakers game, there's quite a bit of value, and that I like. But again, for tournaments, it's going to be a little difficult to differentiate yourself without sort of making really not optimal lineups,
Right. Like, if you look at, that Nets-Lakers game, it's obvious. It's so obvious, to look at, look at those guards. So,
right.
And Brook Lopez, but they are in such great spots. It's kind of really hard to fade them. And maybe you look at just making one or two pivots away. Maybe put your cash game in a GPP lineup with all that upside still, and maybe make one or two pivots to maybe try and differentiate yourself. And I think the Hornets game is where it's best to do it, because maybe you hope the Phoenix game stays close and Walker Batum can deliver that upside that you need.
Right, and to really get that upside to play cash, you usually want one or two more games in a slate like this, but since there's only 6, it kind of makes it a little uneasy there on that side as well. So it's kind of a really uneasy slate for me.
Yeah. Looking at games that I'm intrigued with all 6 to a certain degree. Miami, Chicago is probably the one I'm least concerned about, just because, it's going to be a little bit low scoring. Get the Heat at home, going to be a slower paced game. A lot of guys with price tags that I don't really feel like I want to pay for outside of Hassan Whiteside. You were kind of more on the fence. You're a little bit more optimistic about this game than I am.
Yeah, I'm pretty intrigued by this game, and I think this is one where there's an opportunity to differentiate yourself, because the implied totals are quite a bit lower than the other games today, and I do a little narrative street, but there have been a lot of sort of playoff matchups with the Bulls and Heat over the years, and I think Rose, Wade, Whiteside, sort of, and some of the Bulls secondary pieces are in play for me tonight.
Yeah, if you look at those small forwards, McDermott and Dunleavy have just been stellar. Off the bench for McDermott, shooting the ball well and kind of rating around that 20-25 range that you need as a value punch small forward spot. So I think them and then Whiteside are kind of the only place for me. And then if Rose sits, Gasol, just because he becomes basically point center, he goes out and he's a triple-double threat. So I do like him. But transitioning over to point guard tonight, Steph Curry, kind of a shocker. I guess it's a shocker. I wasn't expecting questionable just because he finished out the game, but it is questionable tonight against Atlanta, and that's kind of a big one.
Yeah, you had mentioned before the show that Golden State plays OKC again soon, so that might lead into sort of their decision to play him or not tonight. And you also mentioned that where the usage gets distributed for that Golden State team, you should probably talk about that for a sec, I guess.
Yeah, if you look, Livingston's the guy who gets the minutes off the bench there. It gets around 28 when Curry does sit. It's not a huge sample size, but from the games Curry has sat this season, Klay Thompson gets a big bump. He's at 26% usage rate this season, gets up to 30% when Curry does sit. You'd think Draymond Green would get more involved in the offense when Curry sits, but that's not the case. The bump's really small. It's only just a 0.8% usage rate bump there, and his peripheral stats go up just a tad. It's not significant, and the scoring drops a little bit lower. So it's not a big thing. It's not like I'm jumping at Draymond Green when Curry
Right.
sits. It'll be Thompson who I'll be all over if Curry does sit.
And I think that initial sort of visceral reaction to seeing Curry out, you instantly go, "Oh, okay, Draymond's going to sort of run the show here." But I guess based on the splits and stuff, that's not actually the case. So that's something interesting to take into account for tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of look, and hopefully we get that news, before. It won't be like Rondo last
Mhm.
night where we're
Oh
all in
God,
Collison and
yeah.
coming back to play. But um, I mean, Curry always a tournament play when he plays. Just a 10-point spread. You kind of anticipate this one being close, and when games stay close, and when Curry can play a fourth quarter, he
Hmm.
has huge upside. So uh,
Right.
yes, he's expensive, but there is plenty of value on the slate to work him in.
Next guy, Damian Lillard. He's actually a pretty interesting play for me. Um, Obviously, you love him, and I think in cash games he's a very solid play tonight. I think he's got pretty much the highest floor of the highest price options, but I, in terms of roster construction, I think it might be a little harder to get him in than I feel comfortable with, I guess.
I think it's a little site dependent. I think you make a good point because on DraftKings, the value plays that are better value plays on FanDuel are more in play there, and you can pair them up with Lillard a little bit easier as far as DraftKings. Guys like Toledovich, um, some of the other value guys like I believe Aaron Gordon's still priced pretty cheap on FanDuel, so you kind of can make a balanced lineup around him as far as DK. It's a little bit different. Um, I just think you look at there's no real blowout concern here. His usage rate is through the roof. It's over 30%. I think I'm just going to pay up for that price tag and
Yeah.
still work my lineup around him.
And if you are playing cash tonight, I think he's pretty much a must play or try to fit him in because it's not the end of the world for his price. So yeah,
And if you're looking to make a pivot, Kemba Walker, a great matchup against the Suns, struggled against point guards all this season. You look at the last time Walker played him, went off, and if you're going to go solely based off that, Batum did sit that game, and I mean Walker didn't shoot particularly well, but his usage was high, so he still went 25, 6, and 4. Still a great tournament option if Phoenix can keep this one close.
yeah, definitely intriguing. Again, there is that blowout option, and you could see this one getting out of hand pretty quickly. But if Walker does play sort of 25 to 30 minutes, I think he's a really good shot to hit value.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his price, it's not bad. If he was up
Yeah.
closer to Lillard, maybe it would be a little bit more of a risk. But like you said, I mean, he can hit certainly what he needs to hit in three quarters against the Suns. So I
Mhm.
do like him. Then we take a big price drop down to the next tier because that Brooklyn and LA game is really where the guards are going to be at. And D'Angelo Russell, Jordan Clarkson, Donald Stone, all great plays for me. Donald Stone, strictly a cash game. I don't think the upside's there. You just prefer Russell or Clarkson for that
Yeah,
higher seed.
definitely on Sloan. I think he's a solid player, but just in terms of his game, his role, and everything that sort of goes into this, it's just not there for tournaments.
Yeah. And if you're looking at other guys, I mean, I think this is going to be the general consensus around the industry is talking about that Brooklyn LA game. But if you do want to make a strong pivot, Deron Williams, Alfred Payton, both, I mean, in good spots, going up against
Hmm.
each other. Both have struggled against opposing point guards. A lower floor than you like for both of them, but I mean, the upside is there from both sides. So it's an intriguing pivot, but
Yeah,
it's
I
tough.
think I think the narrative of Brandon Jennings it does cap Peyton's ceiling a little bit, but his minutes haven't changed as much as I expected when they first brought him in. So that's definitely something you want to look into if you're sort of looking at the cheaper point guards tonight.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, Peyton's still been kind of around that 25-minute mark. We have seen him play a little bit lower in the first two games Jennings played, but Scott Skiles is always going to do his thing back there, so it's not fun. But I think Peyton's a more a safer option than what he was when Jennings first arrived. And I still won't play him in cash, but a GPP target, he's solid.
Yeah, and we were talking about sort of that Phoenix, like Ronnie Price and stuff like that. And when it really comes down to it, it doesn't necessarily make sense to sort of depending on what that 900 gets you on DraftKings, sorta, or whatever it is on FanDuel, it doesn't necessarily make sense to sort of jump down there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, on tonight's slate, there's not a lot of superstars to go with, who are priced over 9K. Um, what does that difference from a guy like Peyton Sloan to Ronnie Price? I don't think you need to make that jump tonight. And I'm
Right.
not a big fan of the Phoenix Suns situation overall. I mean, just because of the inconsistency with minutes and the low production of late.
Mm-hmm.
Went over to shooting guard, and Evan Fournier, questionable tonight, had the sore wrist, didn't play. We saw Mario Hezonja play on the last game. Played pretty well, but still not a guy, as you mentioned, that savings, I don't know what it gets me tonight. I don't think it's going to get me much, so I don't think I'm going to be paying down for a low floor player like him.
Right.
I think a guy like Peyton actually takes a little bit bigger bump when Fournier sits, just because it's a little simpler in that backcourt.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, as we've seen in quite a few situations this year, the usage doesn't necessarily go to the guy stepping in, you know. It might just go to the guy who's already starting.
Yeah, that's likely the case here. I mean, Oladipo's seen a bigger bump, and Peyton as well, and you're going to get guys like Gordon and Foose who just the starting rotation just takes a bigger hit for usage.
Mm-hmm.
Kobe Bryant, always questionable because he's old. He is. Byron Scott said he's expected to play on the back-to-back here, but we can never really trust anyone in the NBA ever says. So if Kobe does play, it kind of takes a little bit of a spin in the backcourt there with Clarkson and those guys. I like their upside a lot more if Kobe sits tonight.
Yeah, it does take the edge off a little bit. If he does play, Kobe always a tournament option. I mean, he had that nicer stretch a few weeks ago, but I mean, he does still have that upside to shoot 25, 30 shots in a game. So that's always there. And I mean, in terms of that range, there isn't much there tonight. So if you need a player to fit in that range and he is playing, pretty intriguing.
Yeah. Yeah, looking up top, there's a nice, decent options there of Klay Thompson, CJ McCollum, Victor Oladipo, Dwayne Wade, Nicholas Batum, all intriguing options. I'm not a big fan of Wade, but I do like Batum, Oladipo in that range. I like Thompson, especially if Curry sits tonight. And Thompson's just kind of a good guy to get exposure to. If Curry does play, I think he's a great GPP target because he still possesses that huge upside that you want, and it's a cheaper exposure to get to that game. That's the highest scoring total on the night.
Yeah, I think Wade's the weakest out of those options. I actually really like Batum for his price compared to all of those players, but I just like this. I just like this matchup for Wade, I guess, and he's been playing consistent minutes, sort of getting consistent usage, over 18 shot attempts in 8 of the last 9 games. So he hasn't been great, but I think this could be a 35 to 40 point night, and at his price, I think that's a nice sort of odds to hit value. But in terms of the guys he's priced around, you're probably looking at those guys for your main lineups.
Yeah, I mean, if you transition over to FanDuel, where pricing is a little bit different, Wade is the highest price guy. That's not Jimmy Butler tonight. And then you're kind of looking cheaper. So Batum got a nice little price difference. He's just 6,200 on FanDuel. I think he's a great play in all formats there just because of the price considered. Kind of a significant difference from, a guy like Klay Thompson, who's 1,000 difference, who are arguably a similar floor. And I think Batum's even got the higher ceiling for me.
Mm-hmm.
But
agreed.
Looking a bit cheaper, it's kind of tough. You're getting into a territory where you don't feel good about it. Wesley Matthews, I mean, a decent cash game option. I don't think the ceiling is definitely there for GPPs, but been a little bit more consistent over the last 5 games, 23, 27, 25, and 29. Just played 24 minutes in the blowout last game, but an average matchup against Orlando tonight.
Yeah, and again, I think average defines Wesley Matthews pretty well right now. It's just pretty average. If you're looking for 25 points and maybe to clear up a little room, that's pretty much his ceiling. I mean, 25 to 28 points, but in a cash game, you'll take it because his floor is pretty high. So, yeah, he's all right.
Yeah, it's that noisiness. It's it's what he is. It's not fun. It's not. He's never gonna light the world on fire, which is kind of something you want. But looking cheaper.
And there's that's a new rule for tonight. If you put him in your lineups, as you click it, you have to say, all right.
There, in you go. But if Aaron Aflalo sits tonight, he is questionable. Langston Galloway would get a big bump in minutes, played 35 last game. In a tougher matchup against Miami, and went 7-4-5 with 4 steals. He's a bit more productive in the peripheral stats, which I do like over a guy like Wesley Matthews, because he does rack up assists, he does get steals, does get rebounds. Galloway be the better value play down in shooting guard tonight.
Yeah, and I think if you're gonna go lower, you're sort of looking in that range with him or Bogdanovich. But that's pretty much where I'm aiming. I'm kind of hoping Aflalo sits, so I can. I'd be pretty confidently putting Galloway in lineups if Aflalo does sit.
Yeah, I think Bogdanovich there, 28, 11, and 26 over the last 3 games since Joe Johnson's gone. Tougher matchup against Utah led to that 11-point game. So I kind of give people passes against teams like the Jazz and the Spurs and the Heat, slower paced games. So if he gets 35 plus minutes against the Lakers team, I'll be ecstatic because he should easily hit 25 fantasy points.
Definitely.
Looking over at small forward, and this will be a quick position to get through because there's not a lot of guys. Yeah. You got Melo up top. Portland's been really good against the small forwards this season. I mean, Aminu is just a terrific defender. He's lengthy. Melo did carve him up last time for 37. I don't know. I'll be hesitant taking Melo in it, trying to get a rebound performance.
So again, this goes back to Lillard. I think Lillard's just the safer pay up option. If you're gonna pay up, I think it's Lillard. And then you just sort of figure it out at small forward. But, I mean, in a tournament, I can see a scenario where he goes for 45, 50 fantasy points, but it's definitely not safe,
Yeah, I think I'd rather come down to Parsons for about $2,000 cheaper and just go with a more balanced approach tonight and pay up at other spots, especially at power forward and center. There's some good mid-K or mid-6K range guys that you can look at, but Parsons gets the better matchup for me, home against Orlando, and coming off a really solid game. Last 2 games, really 29, 27 real points. Kind of back to his usual self after a couple of tough stretches against tougher opponents.
Right, and it hasn't been every game this year, but he's actually taken quite a big role in terms of offensive usage and sort of just how Carlisle uses him as a player. So I do like him at that price, and he has another nice matchup tonight. So it'll be interesting to see if he keeps that rolling.
Another guy looking at Mirza Teletovic. He is a small forward on DK, power forward on FanDuel. Bit of a better price on FanDuel, but I like him a lot tonight. He's been really consistent, and if you look at what he's been doing over the last handful of games of 5, they're averaging 20 and 7, shooting 50% from the field, shooting 43% from 3. He's the only Suns guy on my radar tonight, and if I go down and somehow Alex Len has another 50-point game, I don't care. I'm not expecting that, but Teletovic is my guy.
Yeah, in terms of process, he's really the only one that makes sense for Phoenix tonight. So, yeah, I like him as well. Quite an interesting role he's making for himself there.
Yeah, especially just because, well, if we're looking on DK's small forward's weak, not a lot of options, and of course he's not even small forward eligible on FanDuel, so that's tough. So you kind of have to get into the Kent Bazemores, the PJ Tuckers, and even look at the Chicago guys.
I was going to say, our friend Jason was strongly pondering whether to Baze more or Baze less tonight.
Yeah, it's kind of intriguing. I mean, he just played 16 minutes last time against Golden State. Not great. Didn't shoot, the ball well, struggled defensively, which is why he was taken out. But He has seen bigger minutes, 26, 33, 28, and 26 DK points. He's a guy who can rack up stats across the board. So cheap exposure on that Hawks side. They're expected to produce a ton. The pace is expected to be up. It's intriguing at that price. I think the upside is there.
Yeah, and especially on this slate, he's kind of that guy you look at when you're trying to fit in a 5K range player. So
Yeah.
definitely intriguing at the very least.
And I think Tucker's going to be the more popular play. It just being 200 cheaper there, and Tucker is a bit heavier in minutes. But God, we've been down the Tucker road before sometimes, and he's a guy who can play 30 minutes plus and still drop 11 to 12 fantasy points, and that's it.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, people, it's going to be looking at that last game and thinking, oh, he has this upside. But I mean, game to game, he really doesn't have that consistent ceiling, That's kind of a aberration.
Yeah. If Curry does sit tonight, Barnes, Iguodala, they kind of intrigue me a little bit more. We'll kind of see a bigger usage rate off the bench, especially more Iguodala because he's more of a ball handler. At times he can be a playmaker.
Yeah, I think a lot of things become more in play if Curry sits because, again, that's a ton of sort of production taken out.
Yep.
Dougie McBucket's kind of turning it on lately. I don't hate his price tonight and sort of what I see. I mean, Rose is probable, I believe, right?
I thought it was game time decision. Game time decision.
Okay, so I mean, either way, I think he's interesting. But if Rose doesn't end up playing, I think he's even more an interesting option.
Yeah, just because he's going to have to be the scorer off the bench. And I mean, if there's any position that Miami has struggled against, it's been small forwards this season. So I don't mind it. McBuckets has been that guy coming off the bench and shooting the ball pretty well over the last few games. And arguably had a tougher matchup against Portland and still hit 23 fantasy points at a pretty cheap price tag.
Yeah, and you mentioned Dunleavy as well has been pretty consistent lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's more the safer option if you're going between those two players. But I'm arguably the same player. I mean, for me.
Yeah, pretty much.
Moving over to power forward tonight, and there's some decent options tonight. You're starting off with Draymond Green up top. He's a guy, huge upside. I mean, he scored two real points against OKC and puts up 60. I mean, that's the kind of player he is. I mean, 14 assists, 14 rebounds. I think he got a bonus for a halftime locker room yelling like that. But, I mean, 10 combined blocks and steals. This is what Green does. A pretty safe floor in all formats, but I like him a little bit more for GPPs just because I think guys like Gordon don't have that huge 45-plus upside.
Right, yeah. He's clearly intriguing, but he's intriguing every night. It's not just if Curry sits, he's an intriguing option either way. I do like him. I think – so I'm kind of looking at the opposite end of the spectrum at that Atlanta front court. I'm looking at Paul Millsap. I really, really like him tonight. And, I mean, as we saw last game, we're going to talk about Horford. But I think both of those guys have some pretty intriguing upside in this matchup. Obviously, you don't like anyone against Golden State at home, but I actually do think they have some intriguing upside.
Yeah, like you mentioned, both Horford and Millsap. The interior defense for the Warriors hasn't been great, allowing a ton of points inside. Millsap's a great guy because he can, once again, he's like Green in a way. He doesn't have to score points, real points, to generate fantasy points with his defensive game. And I'll look for him to rebound from that last performance, and I think a lot of people are going to be off of him. But if Atlanta's going to have any chance of keeping this game close, it's going to be guys from Millsap and Horford that do it.
Right.
So yeah, I do think he's a great play tonight, and I think just because guys like Thaddeus Young, Aaron Gordon, are just going to be the popular cash game guys, as they should.
Chalky. Yeah, no, warranted. I mean, you look at Thaddeus Young and that matchup against the Lakers, that's just a great play. So I'm not knocking that, but Millsap is an interesting pivot.
Yeah, definitely. I think paying up at power forward is going to be the move that kind of separates yourself for a little bit if you are going to do it. But that's anyone against the Lakers. I'll take. Thaddeus Young's been solid. No Joe Johnson, so I like him a little bit more. Been really consistent since he's gone. Consistency's been the word for Aaron Gordon for quite some time now, and I'm expecting another 30-plus game. I mean, there's no way around it right now. Dallas struggles rebounding the ball, and they struggle against power forwards. So, Gordon, I'm going to keep sliding Gordon in.
Hey, you love the cash game floor with the high upside ceiling, and that's what he is right now. I mean, until he gets into the mid 7Ks, this is just it's pretty much every game. So you can't deny it. I love him pretty much in all formats on both sites.
Yep. Looked a little bit cheaper. Two guys that are flying a little bit under the radar: Julius Randle and Marvin Williams. I like both. I think Marvin Williams is just more of a tournament pivot. I don't quite see him as a totally different range of fantasy production from Randall tonight, but Marvin Williams is kind of the intriguing different name at power forward tonight.
Yeah, and he's got an easier matchup, so he's a little more matchup dependent based on sort of his skill set. He's not going to do well against a Draymond Green or anything like that, but in these easier matchups, I think that's sort of a place to look. But I actually do like Randall better tonight. Again, we talked about his matchup, and that's a game where you could see him getting 15 plus rebounds. So yeah, at that price point, sort of you're looking at Randall. Dirk again, I think cash game Dirk, but yeah, other than that, I kind of like Randall in that group.
Yeah, me as well. And if you're looking at cheaper, we should mention David Lee, just because he's been a great GPP guy over the last two games, 30 and 37 DK points. Nearly a double-double in both games, 13 and 9, 14 and 14. He's always been this player, fantasy points per minute wise, great when he's on the floor. Doesn't play defense for anything, but I mean, we're not looking at him to do that. So if you look at that Denver game, he got minutes because Denver went small. Dirk played the 5, he played the 4. The Minnesota game, Dirk got into foul trouble pretty early. It was a blowout. I'm not trusting him in cash, but I think GPPs, he's definitely in play, kind of hoping for that same thing, especially because Orlando, they don't have a ton of size.
Right. Yeah, no, I do like this, and I think this opens up a significant amount for you if you do pay down for Lee there. So that's an intriguing option. This isn't just like a 1 or 2 game thing. Like, he's always been good points per minute, like fantasy points per minute. So if he does continue to get sort of solid minutes, then this should continue. Not like this, but he should get consistent fantasy points.
Yeah. I mean, you count on him as being at least a 1 fantasy point per minute guy. So if he gets 20, he gets you 20. If he gets you 25, he's getting you 25. So that's the type of player I view him as. We'll go over to center. A lot of top options tonight. Gasol's really only in play for me in tournaments if Rose sits.
Yeah, I'm with you. Man, there's just so many intriguing options up top that the guy who sort of goes for 60 out of this group is going to be the one that tells the tale of sort of tournaments. But I mean, on DraftKings, you're looking at maybe playing 2 of them where you can. On FanDuel, I think you're sort of I'm probably going to be running out multiple of these players, sort of switching it up where I can, diversifying a little bit.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, you can look at all these guys, kind of a pretty safe 40 fantasy point floor. And then the room for upside is tremendous with all of them. So you're kind of looking who gets that difference from the 4. And I think if Rose sits, Gasol's a likely guy just because he takes on a more of a usage role. We saw that last game. Whiteside always has a huge block upside. I mean, the guy can land a triple-double in 25 minutes with blocks. Vus, his offensive usage. Lopez, his offensive usage down low. I'm with you. I think spreading it out. I think Lopez is going to be the cash game guy, but as far as GPPs go, it's going to be all 4 rotating.
Right. Yeah. No, you mentioned Lopez as the cash game guy. I do think that's the move there. But for tournament lineups, I really see the same upside from a lot of these guys. Maybe Voos a little lower upside than the other three, but I do like all four of those options.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And we talked a little bit about Horford. Horford's big game, over the last stretch came against Golden State, 23, 6 and 16 with 5 blocks, 3 steals. But Horford's been really consistent as a floor guy too, over late. And I think he's just another contrarian piece if you want to get more Atlanta guys into that lineup and hoping they keep things close and just take advantage of the high pace and high total.
Right. Again, it's going to be a little tough to differentiate yourself tonight. So if you want to make some kooky Atlanta lineups, I'm not against it.
Yeah. Really, I mean, paying down at center is not wise tonight. You're paying up. I can't really look at anyone that I really like just because they don't have the floor or the ceiling as those top 4 guys. So I'm not even going to mention anyone. Are you on board? I think you feel the same, right?
Yeah, no. And I mean, normally you try to look for some value at every position, but based on how strong it is tonight, I think you really need to look at paying up at center.
Yeah. Yep. I'm with you there. That's going to wrap things up here for the Minutes to Win It podcast. Check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all our great tools and content.